You felt it, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet shift inside you. A subtle drop. You leave a conversation and something feels off. You replay what you said, not because it was wrong, but because you said too much. You explained yourself. Again, at the time it felt reasonable, even necessary. You wanted to be clear. You wanted to be understood. You wanted to avoid tension. So you added context. You justified your decision. You softened your stance. And the moment passed. But later, something lingered. A faint sense of weakness, not fear, not shame, just less solidity. You notice it most after certain interactions, after defending a boundary, after saying no, after being questioned. You don't feel relieved, you feel exposed, as if by explaining yourself you gave something away, something you can't name but you feel. You sense it when people look at you slightly differently afterward, when the tone changes, when the dynamic shifts. They didn't argue with you, but somehow you lost ground. And what's unsettling is this: you did nothing wrong. You were polite, calm, rational. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't insult anyone, you just explained. Yet the result feels the same every time. You walk away feeling smaller, less firm, less anchored, as if your position became negotiable the moment you justified it. You might tell yourself it's overthinking, that you're reading too much into it, but your body knows better. Your chest feels tight. Your energy dips. Your mind keeps circling back. Why did I say all that? Why didn't I just stop after the first sentence? You notice others don't do this. They state things briefly, cleanly, no footnotes, no emotional cushioning. And strangely, no one questions them. They don't explain. And yet, they're respected. You, on the other hand, feel the urge to clarify, to preempt misunderstanding, to make sure no one feels uncomfortable. And every time you do, something erodes. Not your confidence, your authority. This is the part no one talks about. Explaining yourself feels harmless, even virtuous. But deep down, you sense it's costing you something. You just don't know what. Not yet. And that uncertainty, that quiet, gnawing feeling after the conversation ends, that's not anxiety. It's awareness. Something in you has noticed a pattern. And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. The pattern is subtle. That's why it works. You don't notice it while it's happening. You notice it after the conversation ends, after the message is sent, after the explanation is already out there. You replay it in your head, not the whole exchange, just your part. You remember the extra sentences, the unnecessary details, the justifications no one asked for. You catch yourself thinking, I should have stopped there. That last part wasn't needed. Why did I explain it like that? This happens most when someone questions you, not aggressively, casually. A raised eyebrow, a simple why, a pause that feels slightly too long, and instantly something activates in you. You feel the urge to fill the space, to clarify, to defend, to make your reasoning airtight. So you talk, you explain your thought process, your intentions, your circumstances. You want them to see that you're reasonable, that you're not selfish, that you've thought this through. But notice what happens next. They don't push back, they don't argue, they just listen. And when it's over, the dynamic has shifted. They didn't need to convince you of anything, you convinced yourself. You feel it when your words trail off, when your voice lowers slightly at the end, when you add phrases like, just trying to be fair. I didn't mean it in a bad way. I hope that makes sense. These are not explanations. They are appeasements. Another symptom shows up later. You start anticipating questions before they're asked. You preemptively justify your choices. You explain your decisions before anyone challenges them. You send longer messages than necessary. You add disclaimers. You soften statements that were already clear. And slowly you train people to expect this from you. They don't say it out loud, but they learn something important. If they pause long enough, if they stay silent, if they look uncertain, you will give them more information, more reasoning, more access to your internal world. Meanwhile, notice what you don't get back. You don't feel heard. You don't feel respected. You don't feel grounded. You feel drained, as if each explanation takes something out of you. And here's the most revealing symptom of all. When someone else doesn't explain themselves, when they give a short answer, when they refuse to elaborate, you feel slightly uncomfortable, not because they're rude, but because they're untouchable. Their position feels final. Yours feels open for discussion. So you overcompensate. You think clarity will protect you. You think transparency will earn respect. You think logic will stabilize the situation. But the opposite keeps happening. The more you explain, the less solid you feel. The more reasonable you sound, the more negotiable you become. And deep down, you sense the truth. This isn't about communication, it's about position. And right now, without realizing it, you're standing lower than you should. Here is the uncomfortable truth. You don't explain yourself because you're unclear. You explain yourself because you were taught that not explaining is dangerous. Somewhere along the way, you learned that clarity equals safety. That if people understand your reasons, they won't judge you. They won't reject you. They won't challenge you. So you learn to be reasonable, patient, understanding, emotionally intelligent. You learned to see every angle. And that skill made you adaptable. But it also made you exposed. Because what feels like maturity on the surface often functions as permission underneath. Permission for others to evaluate you, to weigh your reasons, to approve or disapprove your choices. When you explain yourself, you are subtly saying, this decision is open for review. Not in words. In structure, you place your authority inside their reaction, and this is where the power leak happens. You think explaining shows confidence, but confidence doesn't need validation. Power doesn't need consensus. Authority doesn't ask to be understood. It simply is. The habit of explaining is often rooted in a virtue you're proud of. You don't want to be unfair. You don't want to be misunderstood. You don't want to create conflict. So you offer transparency. But transparency without boundaries becomes submission. Every extra sentence is an invitation. Every justification is a door left open. Not because people are cruel, but because human dynamics are predictable. When you explain, you move from decider to defendant. You take a position, then immediately place it on trial. And once you do that, the hierarchy is set. They don't have to overpower you. You've already lowered yourself. This is why explaining feels calming in the moment. It reduces tension. It soothes uncertainty. But it also creates a long-term cost, because the brain of the other person registers something important. You can be moved. You can be influenced. You can be pressured into clarity. And the most dangerous part? You don't notice this happening. Because you're busy being reasonable. But reason is not neutral in power dynamics. It favors whoever is willing to stay silent longer. Whoever can tolerate tension. Whoever doesn't rush to be understood. This is why some people speak less, yet carry more weight. They are not smarter. They are not more logical. They are simply not explaining themselves into weakness. And once you see this, something clicks. The problem was never your communication skills. It was the belief that you owe people access to your reasoning. You don't. And the moment you stop believing that, everything begins to shift. This is where the feeling changes, not suddenly, but cleanly. You stop seeing the habit as a flaw, and you start seeing it as a signal. That weak feeling after explaining yourself was never self-doubt. It was misalignment, a quiet internal alarm telling you something important. You spoke from fear of reaction, not from inner authority. And once you understand that, the shame disappears. Because this was never about being spineless, or insecure, or incapable. It was about forgetting where your center is. Your center is not in being understood. It's in being decided. Authority doesn't come from dominance, it comes from internal closure. When you explain yourself unnecessarily, you are reopening a decision that was already made inside you. That's why it feels destabilizing. You moved your anchor. The moment you stop doing that, something unexpected happens. You feel calmer, not because people approve, but because you no longer need them to. You begin to notice a difference in your body. Your chest doesn't tighten as much. Your voice doesn't trail off. Your sentences end cleanly. You speak and you stop. No defense, no padding, no emotional cushioning. And here's the strange part. People don't explode. They don't attack you. They don't reject you. Some might pause, some might push once, but most simply adjust. Because you've changed the structure. You're no longer asking to be evaluated. You're declaring position. And this is where your power returns, not as aggression, not as arrogance, but as self-respect. Self-respect doesn't explain itself. It doesn't justify boundaries. It doesn't negotiate identity. It doesn't over-clarify decisions that were already clear. It allows silence to exist, and silence is not emptiness. Silence is weight. When you stop explaining, you stop leaking. You reclaim the space where your authority lives, not externally, internally. This is why the habit was never random. You started explaining more the moment you stopped trusting yourself fully, the moment you outsourced certainty. But the moment you bring it back, everything stabilizes. You don't become colder. You become harder to move. And that's the difference. The weakness you felt wasn't a personality defect. It was feedback, a signal telling you that you stepped out of alignment with your own inner hierarchy, and now that you see it, you can't go back to not seeing it. Once you see this, your past starts to reorganize itself. You remember moments differently, the conversations where you felt drained afterward, the boundaries that somehow weakened the more you defended them, the times you walked away feeling strangely exposed. You weren't losing arguments. You were giving explanations to people who never needed them. And now there's a tension, not with others, with yourself, because you realize how often you spoke after your point was already made, how often you kept talking to make the moment comfortable, how often you traded solidity for acceptance. This awareness doesn't make you angry. It makes you precise. You start noticing the urge in real time, that split second where you want to add, just to be clear, or what I meant was, and now you pause, not to manipulate, not to withhold, but to hold your position. And here's the truth most people never face. The world doesn't reward explanation. It responds to structure, to where you stand, and whether you stay there. In the next part, you'll learn exactly how to stop explaining yourself without becoming cold, rude, or aggressive, how to speak less and be taken more seriously, how to let silence do the work your words were never meant to do. But before that, ask yourself this. How many times in your life did you explain a decision, only to watch your authority fade the moment you finished talking? And what would your life look like if you had stopped one sentence earlier?